YouTube. So, this is the second part of a video where I want to essentially discuss, not particularly argue, but discuss some conclusions that I personally have come to based on arguments that are based on empirical, observable facts that pertain to this notion of the patriarchy. I've been on YouTube for quite some time with this account now. Hasn't been quite a year, but over the course that I've been here, I've been subscribed to several YouTubers. I've subscribed to people like Mr. 1001 Nights, Buddhagen, the Left Libertarian, Anubis, which is more of a recent subscription, but one of my now favorite YouTubers, Prof MTH. I just recently subscribed to Feminist Whore, who's a feminist here on YouTube who makes spectacular videos. I think it's her communication skills. She has a voice that's it's appealing to listen to. So it got my attention the entire time, like from the beginning, from her part 1 of her video all the way to the end of the part 2 video. And she makes well thought out arguments. And you know, like, I have a whole list of influences and friends, but they have nothing. I am subscribed to so many people. It's kind of hard, really, to to discuss only a few. So I have influences that come at me from various different individuals, different perspectives, and many of them would discuss this notion of the patriarchy because I'm subscribed to several feminists. You may know Divinity. Most of you may know her. Scouse, I consider her a feminist whore. And their opinions or their perceptions of the world have always intrigued me, which is why I was initially subscribed to Nuclear Knight as well, because it always interests me to try to understand the world through the eyes of something I could not possibly have lived. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, because I was born a certain gender, then the way that I perceive the world is probably, and generally would be, different than if I was born a different gender. It shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. And what I mean by that is, in my opinion, it shouldn't matter what gender you are. You should be treated the same on an equality basis, but unfortunately, it's not the way our society works. So this notion of the patriarchy has come up, on several videos, and I often get men's rights activists who claim that it doesn't exist, and they claim a patriarchy exists. A matriarchy exists. So they say a patriarchy doesn't exist, but a matriarchy exists, which is to say that they even go as far as claiming that women have more rights than men, and should be thankful for having more rights. So I think they're both wrong and they're both right. And in that essence, it is that, yes, the patriarchy does exist, but it's not what you think it is. And that's what I'm wanting to discuss here. It's not men, but it is men. Ooh, complicated. And the matriarchy is not women, but it is women. Ooh, complicated. And it's not, it's women, just a certain group of women. No. It is all women, but not any woman. Or a patriarchy is all men, but not any men. Ooh, complicated. And it's really hard to wrap my head around the entire concept, but I think this is a pretty sound and convincing set of ideas that I'm about to throw around here. And I'm about to use the videos that I've asked that you watch first in order to come to or derive certain conclusions based on these videos, based on what I assume you would already know, which is you would have a simple grasp of supply and demand and of capitalist economics, free market economics even. and this notion of rational self-interest. I assume you would know or have a grasp of this. The best way to understand rational self-interest when it's pushed to its extremes is to read Atlas Shrugged or any of the works by Ayn Rand, really. You then get a really good grasp of what rational self-interest is. Now, not this utopian society that she claims would come true, it wouldn't. But just the argument for rational self-interest. It's a great way to understand it. That's how I got around to understanding it. And on the other end, there's also, Karl Marx's Manifesto, which you might want to read. It's a tad more complicated than Ayn Rand's science fiction novels. But again, it simply is based on certain assumptions regarding human behavior. Both are. Whether it's Ayn Rand or whether it's Karl Marx. Any economist, whether they'll admit to it or not, their assertions are based on a certain mold or a certain model of human behavior, which ironically is generally based on the subjective, their view of the world. And how this affects this whole notion of the patriarchy, how this affects the whole notion of a matriarchy, how this affects human interactions, how this affects human psychology, or how it's derived from human psychology. Well, you would need to start off by watching Mr. 1001 Nights videos, really. But you've already watched them, I assume now. Where he makes essentially a notion where men, from a deep down, more basic, roar, like a grunt, macho, from a basic reactionary urge, seek women for their, their replication value. Whereas women, from deep down, subconscious type level, would seek men for several other values and characteristics that are less physical, but could be physical too, because if you have a bigger, stronger man, generally speaking, he'll be best able to protect offspring. But having this, assertive, strong-willed, good hunter-gatherer, or having characteristics that would make him a good provider. And men, it's more like, they'll view women on a basic nature, good childbearing hips, large voluptuous breasts, certain characteristics that would ensure that could bear children without dying during childbirth, which could, that would potentially kill the offspring, and also feed the children afterwards with the jugs, you know what I mean? And of course, if you're saying, well, that doesn't describe me, that's absurd, etc., it's not meant to describe you, an enlightened person. You're viewing the world through different eyes, through enlightened eyes. But it is meant to describe the average, common person, average Joe, average Jane, out there. And this is where things get a little more complicated. And what I mean by this, generally, I identify these people as social conservatives. Whether they're left-leaning social conservatives or right-wing-leaning social conservatives. I identify the left as the matriarchy and the right as the patriarchy in this particular instance, or proponents of the patriarchy and proponents of the matriarchy. And how I come about this, well, essentially it's, whether you like it or not, enlightened people are, or make up, a minority of the population. Liberals are not the majority. They are a minority of the population. So this whole notion of thinking past our primitive urges and reasoning, the age of reason and things of the sorts, well, that's not what the average Joe or Jane does. The average Joe or Jane